Hi everyone, so last night I've pushed some more Demon Hunter with the Marauder set this time around, and this was the first time for me to actually do it this season. And I managed to hit a rank 1 with a GR 146, with a pretty weird setup that I want to talk about. So typically this build is played with a Yang's V-Curve and a Captain Crimson set, and you have a Ring of Fire Grandeur in the cube, but I decided to try something different. So we have this new seasonal power for the Marauder Demon Hunter that changes the way the cluster arrow works. Usually you have the option to play either multi-shot or cluster arrow, and they have like a bit of like a variance in the playstyle. And cluster arrow has some pretty cool mechanics. For example, it can go all across the map as long as there's a straight line of sight, and you can just put it in the middle of a pull and deal a lot of damage from the AoE it does. But it works a bit differently now. So instead of this massive AoE, you have like a rather small, underwhelming animation that just shoots like a little beam in front of you with the cluster bombs room, which is by far the strongest. So the idea is that you make not really such large pulls, but instead try to set up your sentries a little bit to the side of the pull and let them shoot into like a small pull in front of them so that you deal the most damage. Personally, I don't like the season theme all that much, which is also why I decided to not really do such a big Marauder push this time around, and 150 seemed kind of out of reach at my Paragon, but maybe this has changed now. So to synergize with this new playstyle of making rather small pulls, I decided to try out Odyssey's and Convention of Elements. So I added this combo into the mix and dropped the Crimson and dropped the Yanks, which usually gives you like all the damage reduction. And instead we have a lot of offensive power suddenly. I compensated for the lack of defense by adding the Zoe's Secret as an equipped item, which is usually in the cube, so nothing changes there. And also adding the Cloak of the Garwolf that gives me 2 extra wolves. We were playing a little bit like a support Demon Hunter with a convention cycle. So while I was off fire COE, I would just like entangle as much as possible, position my sentries, position the enemies, and then on the fire CE I would nuke and just reapply my entangling shot like one time in between and do like 6 or 7 cluster arrow attacks. And man, the damage is actually insane with this setup. So as long as you have the entangle buff and you have this convention buff, you do so much damage compared to the regular setup. I was sometimes one-cycling big trash like Hulks or Unburieds and even Demonic Tremors. Sometimes I was 2-cycling elites, or I also killed the boss in like 2 minutes, easy peasy on this tier, no stricken. So it's actually pretty crazy. And like the regular setup needs at least another minute on the boss on 146, I'd say. So you can definitely tell the power of this build. Obviously the disadvantage is we don't have Crimson, so we have way less cooldown for our Vengeance. We have way less cooldown for our Sentries, for our Wolf. So everything is just like clunkier, harder to do. And also we have way less resource cost reduction, especially for the vaulting. So vaulting is very important to dodge attacks. This build is very squishy and it's very hard to survive. And when you can barely move around sometimes, it gets really rough. On top of this, you also have to get the timing of your attacks perfectly right, because if you don't entangle every 4 seconds, for example, then you lose the entangle buff on the entire pull. You have to reapply it to every single enemy again. This also means you have to, for example, count the amount of enemies, get a bit of an idea of like how often you need to shoot your entangles so that you actually apply the Odyssey debuff to everything, which also depends a little bit on the exact monster combo that you're fighting. So for example, as you can see here, when you have the chicken monster type, you have lots of little small targets. So you have to entangle a lot more to actually apply the debuff to everything. But on the other hand, you have some other monster sets like the Dark Berserkers or the Hulks, where there's very few enemies and you can actually focus more on damage. But the resource management is way harder, both on Hatred and Discipline. Surviving is way harder, and I do not recommend this for anyone. But it's a pretty interesting development with this new build, and I actually realized that this is very close to a setup that we made just last season, I believe, for a potential M6 CDH RGK, which was basically working like that. So we have exactly this 6-piece setup with the convention, with the Odyssey, and this was supposed to be replacing the Rift Guardian killer and allowing you to run triple support of a trash killer. Now it's not exactly a good Rift Guardian killer, but it would be kind of like enough to kill a 150 boss with a fairly optimized setup in probably something like 3 minutes or so. But in Season 27 this is not necessary and it's not useful at all, because we have way stronger Rift Guardian killers. which just makes it way more worth to run something else. But just as I was about to record this video, I realized the similarities with this setup that we have here, which I think was originally proposed by Northvar. But either way, it's kind of interesting to see that it works in solo, and honestly, I think this feels stronger than like the regular Marauder setup by, yeah, probably like a tier or so, or maybe 2 even. So considering especially the really fast boss kill, it would allow me with enough fishing to potentially even clear 150 at just 3k Paragons. And my setup is not even yet fully optimized. So I cleared this 146 here last night, and this was with like a bit of experimentation, like 1.5 hours of trying or something like that. I had no conduit, I had no power pylon. It was actually crazy. And my gear is not really fully optimized for this anyway. So I have Vitality on a quiver, for example, that could be area damage. Here we have attack speed, that could be area damage. Here I was actually thinking about going with an Ancient Shoulder that has dexterity and I can augment it, maybe dropping the cooldown. I think that would probably be a pretty good boost as well, of like something like 7% DPS, a bit of toughness. I have a ring like this, so there's definitely some room for optimization here. I could get like 80% more area damage or so. That alone would already boost me by like 2 tiers or so, and just some other like improvements on the gear. I also just crafted a Story Secret here real quick, so I ended up with this after like 200 months of reforging. I just tried to go from 8.9 to 9.0% on the affix, and then got this, which I guess is kind of acceptable, but it's still non-ancient, so it could be, you know, like another augment. It could be then another 10% plus toughness or so. And, well, the build needs all the toughness you can get. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this setup is going to stick around after the season, but I might try it again next season. So if there's like no other like seasonal theme change to the build and we play like a regular non-seasonal build again, then I would definitely try this again at least. It seems kind of fun, but on the other hand, I believe in a regular season without this cluster arrow power that we have right now, that makes it such a small, like little beam. We have just bigger pulls, we have way too many targets on these Odysseys to really pop off. But it's definitely something that I will be experimenting with in the future. So let's see how this will go in season 28. And I might push this a little bit more. Maybe I'll do like 148 or so. That should be definitely within reach without too much trouble, considering how relatively easily I cleared this 146. And maybe later in the season, I'm actually going to go back and farm some other improved Demon Hunter loot and try the 150. So I think it will be possible at like 3k something to actually beat it with this setup. But as I mentioned, it's very hard to play, so this is a build that is for like the Dioxides and the Saluters and the Camilles of this world. And I would not recommend to try this at home, guys. Just if you want to play Marauder Demon Hunter, you should probably just stick to the regular Yang's version, or just push Wimpale, which is reasonably close to Marauders this season because of this insane power it gets from the Strafe seasonal theme. And you shouldn't really have to bother that much with the Marauders. It's really clunky, it's really difficult, and only if you're willing to dedicate a lot of time to your Marauder push, you should even try, in my opinion. Impale is just really strong, really easy, and not really much can go wrong compared to this. And this is also it for this video. So as I mentioned, I'm going to upload the full rank 1 clear that I've done, or maybe I'm going to upload a higher clear if I do another one today. So one of the two, I guess. Personally, I had a blast with the season so far and experimenting with some weird new setups like this. I mostly did this build because I was not really a fan of the Marauder this season with the seasonal power. And I just wanted to kind of try something me, which actually worked out really great. But desperate times require desperate measures. And here we are. So let's see how far we can push us. Hope you enjoyed this little video. I wish you good luck in season 27 and see you guys next time.